100 years ago, President Abraham Lincoln told his fellow citizens that we cannot escape history. Since we can't escape it, we may as well try to understand it, to learn from the past. In understanding the history of the Park Department, you'll soon learn that parks and recreation are more than just fun and games.
The past we are about to explore is the early history of the Park Department in Fort Wayne. Although this era seems distant, the first 70 years of parks and recreation remain the dominant influence on the present. So our story will be only this first chapter, from the birth of parks in Fort Wayne until the beginning of the Great Depression in the 1930s. Our contemporary Parks and Recreation Department, with its 1,800 acres of parkland, the Children's Zoo, Outdoor Theater, and Johnny Appleseed Festival, is another chapter. The story of the young parks, such as Franke, McMillan, Schoaf, and Fryman, is best saved for tomorrow. For now, the first chapter begins with the era of Abraham Lincoln, who was president when Fort Wayne christened her first park in 1863.
In the midst of the Civil War, the city established her first park, Old Fort Park. It was only 1/8 of an acre near the intersection of Clay and Main Streets. The land was thought to be the site of General Anthony Wayne's fort, built in 1794. So the plot was acquired to commemorate Wayne's American stockade. Near the end of the 1800s, Old Fort Park became the home of a cannon captured by General Henry Lawton during the Spanish-American War. That cannon is now in front of the Historical Museum in Swinney Park.
Fort Wayne's second park was also touched by General Lawton, who was the city's most famous war hero. In 1866, Fort Wayne purchased land on the extreme north side of the city, which was to be the site of the Indiana State Fair. Unfortunately, only one state fair was ever held in Fort Wayne, so the city turned the land into Northside Park in the 1870s. Like Old Fort Park, Northside was a war memorial. A monument to Civil War soldiers and sailors was erected in the late 1870s. Then in 1900, after General Lawton was killed by a sniper in the Philippines, Northside Park was renamed Lawton Park. In the 1890s, Lawton Park became the Park Department's home.
By 1900, Fort Wayne, with a population of 50,000, had 4 other major parks. Hayden Park, on the east side of the city, was purchased in 1876. The 1¼ acre site sported a large freshwater fountain, manicured lawns, graveled walks, and hundreds of trees, plants, and flowers. The heroic statue of Anthony Wayne, which is now in Fryman Square, was originally in Hayden Park.
McCulloch Park on Broadway across from General Electric was given to the city by Hugh McCulloch, who was Secretary of the Treasury under Presidents Lincoln and Andrew Johnson. The land was originally the city's public cemetery until 1886, when the graves were moved and the land became a park. A bandstand was constructed in the park through the cooperation of the Park Department and General Electric, and for many years the GE Band delighted crowds during the summer band concerts in McCulloch Park.
The south side of the city was served by Reservoir Park. The centerpiece of the park was a hill, the highest point in Fort Wayne. The hill contained the city's fresh water supply and indeed was a reservoir. At the foot of the hill on the Clinton Street side, a lake was formed from the excavation for the storage tank. Reservoir Park was the site of most of Fort Wayne's celebration of the Indiana Centennial in 1916. Crowds would take over the park during popular outdoor concerts at Reservoir Park's open-air theater. Reservoir remains a favorite spot for ice skating and fishing.
But the pride of the city's park system at the turn of the century was the new Swinney Park. Fort Wayne's youngest park was also the largest, with almost 45 acres. In his will, Colonel Thomas Swinney deeded his land to the city with the understanding that his children could use the property for the rest of their lives. For years, Swinney Park was the site of the Allen County Fairgrounds. In fact, the existing circle drive in the park is the old half-mile horse racetrack. In 1863, the city leased the land from the Swinney heirs for $600 a year for 30 years, and it soon became Swinney Park. After the death of the remaining Swinney family members, the actual homestead was transformed into the Allen County Fort Wayne Historical Museum.
importantly, Swinney Park represented a change in the philosophy of the role of parks in the modern city. Swinney Park was the park of the future. The 5 older parks might best be described as European-style parks. That is, they were passive as far as recreation was concerned. Look but don't touch, just enjoy their beauty describes the role of the early parks. They tended to be small, stressing leisurely strolls or quiet meditation. At the heart of the older parks was a statue or monument or fountains. But most dominant were the ever-present formal gardens containing hundreds of carefully arranged bedded flowers. These parks were living pictures painted with flowers, a visual oasis planted in the city.
The European philosophy can be seen quite clearly when we examine the remarkable commitment made to flowers by the infant park department. In comparison to today, when the greenhouses produce 80,000 plants and flowers annually for 77 parks, it seems incredible that at the turn of the century, the greenhouses supplied just 6 parks with more than 100,000 plants and flowers. In 1900, Swinney Park, the largest with 45 acres, had 18,000 greenhouse flowers. But Lawton Park, which was 15 acres smaller than Swinney, had 25,000 flowers. McCulloch Park, with only 4 acres, had 22,000 flowers, while Hayden Park, which was less than 1 1/4 acres, had 10,000. Even tiny Old Fort Park had 1,000 flowers in the 1/8 of an acre sliver of land.
In contrast to the old world parks, Swinney Park was a different concept, a pleasure park, a place where people could picnic and play field games. Swinney Park featured lawn tennis courts, baseball diamonds, a pavilion, a bandstand, swings, and even a bicycle track for that new sport. The idea of active recreation in Fort Wayne had begun. Swinney Park even featured drives for carriages and automobiles. In fact, in 1905, Swinney Park was so popular with automobile enthusiasts that the entrance was plagued with traffic jams. To remedy the situation, a new entrance for automobiles was added from Garden Street. Attendance at Swinney Park was greater than all other parks combined, as the recreation-minded citizens swarmed to the new facilities.
The addition of Swinney Park to the city's park holdings prompted the creation of an actual park department as a distinct agency of local government. The park department was placed in the Board of Public Works, but from its inception in 1894 until 1904, the park department was a low priority. C.A. Doswell and his successor as superintendent, August Goers, had few tools with which to develop the park system. Some of the tools included these early park department lawnmowers. In this first decade, the budget for the park department was barely $10,000 a year. That sum was supposed to pay for new parklands, improvement and maintenance of properties, supplies, equipment, and labor. Out of the paltry sum came the exorbitant salary of the superintendent, some $800 per year.
But in 1905, the park department entered a new and exciting era. For about 15 years, from 1905 to 1920, a new vision of parks began to emerge. It's no exaggeration to state that this period was the most important in the history of Fort Wayne parks and recreation. It's the period when they became more than just fun and games.
The motivation for change was the growth of the city itself. Since the Civil War, our city, like so many others, became increasingly industrialized. Fort Wayne was becoming an urban center as the image of small-town rural life evaporated under the onslaught of crowded streets, dense housing, and huge factories. Americans became conscious, more than ever before, of the urban evils, slums, crime, disease, and the lack of open space and clean air.
During this period of time, often known as the Progressive Era, people began to believe that social ills were not a result of the moral failings of individuals, but rather the product of an unhealthy environment. Change the environment, and you could change the way people behave. Thus, it was this attitude that led many Fort Wayne reformers to look at the way in which parks and recreation could stem the tide of decay.
After 1905, the park department was viewed as one way to preserve the quality of urban life, to protect the public's social and physical health. Parks, recreational facilities, and playgrounds became antidotes to pollution, urban blight, unsanitary living conditions, juvenile delinquency, drinking, and even radicalism. This new role for the Park Department is perhaps best stated in a 1915 report.
One of the first duties of a statesman is to take the proper measures for preserving the health of the citizens. Much is being done to remove unsanitary conditions that are liable to endanger the health of the people and to prevent the spread of contagious diseases. But much more should be done to create such facilities and conditions of living as will be apt to make all the people still stronger and still more cheerful. No one will deny that public parks, with their fresh air, their delightful scenery, and their opportunity for walking, boating, and other mild exercise are one of the best helps to gain additional physical strength and that cheerfulness of disposition which is so important in the execution of our daily tasks.
To achieve this goal, the Park Department had to undergo some major changes, for the responsibility for the public's well-being required a larger, more comprehensive park system. The process was aided by the 1905 Cities and Towns Law passed by the state legislature. The new law provided for a board of park commissioners independent of the Board of Works. But it wasn't for another 5 years that the Park Department rose to the forefront in protecting the city from physical and moral decay.
In 1910, the Civic Improvement Association commissioned a city plan to replace haphazard growth with orderly, predictable progress. The plan, which was developed by Charles Robinson, made the Park Department a central figure in the unfolding drama. Every citizen was to be within 10 minutes walking distance of a recreational area. The streets, lawns, rivers, and streams of the city were to become like parklands. The modern city wasn't going to simply add more parks. Robinson envisioned the city itself becoming a park.
Robinson's plan called for a central city mall to dominate the downtown area. One option suggested a government quarter running east between Main and Berry from the courthouse. This mall would feature formal gardens, fountains, and statues linking the courthouse with City Hall, the post office, and a proposed convention hall. An alternate plan was a mall placed north and south on Harrison Street, leading up to the soon-to-be constructed Union Station, now the site of the Pennsylvania Railroad Terminal. Ironically, Robinson's 1910 plan called for a convention center and a large garden in a location which closely mirrors the current plan for downtown redevelopment. The proposed convention center and conservatory conform to the Robinson plan with an eerie accuracy.
In addition to the downtown mall, somewhat reminiscent of the European town squares, Robinson proposed citywide development that affected the Park Department even more directly. Robinson suggested the beautification of the city's riverbanks, the planting and maintenance of shade trees along residential streets, the upgrading of streets leading into major parks, and the construction of special boulevards and parkways in anticipation of an automotive culture.
The Park Department took Robinson's ideas to heart and developed its own plan for the city beautiful. A landscape architect from St. Louis, George Kessler, was hired to develop specific ideas. Kessler's report, published in 1911, was a continuation of Robinson's thinking. At the core of Kessler's plan was Fort Wayne's most distinctive geographic feature, the three rivers.
Kessler argued that the Park Department should purchase all the city's riverbanks and put them to public use. At the time, the riverbanks represented one of Fort Wayne's worst health hazards and eyesores, so transformation into parks would eliminate a major problem as well as create a plentiful, well-distributed reserve of parkland for the future. In addition, Kessler suggested that a Three Rivers Park be created at the junction of the rivers. This central park would be the hub of the entire park system, with the riverbank parks running radially like spokes on a wheel.
More than just parkland, Kessler saw the river areas as prime transportation arteries. He recommended that parkways for automobiles be constructed along the rivers. The parkways would anticipate future transit needs, yet to do so in a way that would preserve the beauty and recreational value of the area. Then, in order to link the river parks with the existing parks, Kessler proposed a series of boulevards, internal residential streets, which would act as the rim of the wheel. Non-boulevard streets would be decorated with trees to make them desirable as well.
The grand vision of Robinson and Kessler was at least partly realized during the Progressive Era. The Fort Wayne Park Department broke with traditional park responsibilities and philosophies in its efforts to improve the quality of urban life in the city. It became a leader not only in improving the growing city, but in promoting Fort Wayne nationally in an effort to attract new business, industry, and citizens. The fame of Fort Wayne, primarily its parks, was on its way to national recognition. The grand vision was launched when Colonel David Foster donated the land where the Three Rivers meet for Three Rivers Park. Over a period of time, the Park Department was able to acquire much riverbank property throughout the city. Eventually, a few parkways were built by the Park Department, such as Griswold Drive and St. Joe Boulevard. Perhaps most important, the Park Department is responsible for the construction of some of today's major boulevards: Forest Park, Brutisel, Anthony, State Street, Theme Drive, Eastbrook, and Westbrook. All were Park Department projects. The Park Department even maintained a forestry division to plant and tend the trees.
Yet, despite these achievements, it's very difficult to see the impact of Kessler's vision. Although there was a flurry of activity in the early part of the 20th century, the vision was implemented in a piecemeal fashion. As a master plan, Kessler's vision floundered upon the rocks of finances.
Above all else, the vision was expensive, and the Park Department was ill-equipped to act on Kessler's plan in one unified motion. While the 1905 Park Law gave political freedom to the department, it was financially toothless. Then, when a new law was passed in 1911, a provision was added that allowed for the creation of special park districts to be taxed by a special property levy. But even this was inadequate for the grand scheme.
The 1911 Park Law helped some areas of the city more than others, since funds could not be transferred from one district to another. The effect can be most clearly seen in the two major parks added to the system in the period, Lakeside and Foster Parks. The land for Lakeside Park was purchased in 1908. After 1912, the residents of the new Lakeside and Forest Park additions were assessed for improvements to the park. The assessment was welcomed by property owners because the park made the area more desirable, thus increasing the value of their homes. The Park Board was well aware of the dividend paid to property owners.
Lakeside and Forest Park now have a park that is not second in beauty to any in the city. The effect has been to add immensely to the property values of that district.
A similar situation existed for Foster Park, which was donated to the city by Colonel David Foster and his brother Samuel Foster in 1912. The newest suburbs for the middle class were in the south part of the city, the area served by Foster Park. Although the development of the park was slow, the improvements were made possible by a levy on adjacent property owners. Over the next few years, the park helped increase property values in the area.
The same process can be seen in the boulevards. Not surprisingly, the new boulevards of Brutisel, Anthony, State, Forest Park, and South Broadway fed into the newest parks and the newest areas of settlement. Once again, property values were on the rise.
Unfortunately, the scheme did not work so well for the poorer areas of the city, for which a tax levy would be a burden instead of an asset. So an alternative idea for citywide development was conceived, a bond issue. However, the city was unable to float a bond until 1917, when the 1911 Park Law was amended. Yet once again, the plan met with frustration because the city of Fort Wayne did not endorse the 1917 amendment for another decade.
The idea of a bond issue was bitterly opposed by many quarters of the city who believed they would not profit from the Kessler Plan and feared their children would have to bear the burden for the bond. Others, such as Mayor William Hosey, placed higher priority on different civic endeavors, such as municipal power and improved water treatment. As a result, Fort Wayne entered the 1920s with a dream whose time had come and almost passed.
If the early decades of the 20th century exhibited the growing pains of adolescence, the 1920s were surely the maturation of the Park Department. Despite the sputtering of the dream, the Park Department made impressive gains in the acquisition of parklands and the development of new and varied services. These were the golden years of Fort Wayne Parks, where high property values and a friendly city administration triggered unprecedented growth.
In 1917, the Park Board hired Adolph Janicki as superintendent, a post he held for more than 20 years. Under Janicki, who mixed the old world philosophy of formal gardens with the new world cry for recreation, the parks became more specialized. Each assumed its own character.
The first public swimming pool was opened in Lawton Park in 1918, while a remarkable two-story pavilion was built in Weiser Park. In Foster, which expanded threefold during the 20s, Fort Wayne's first public golf course was inaugurated in 1928. Lincoln Life even erected a replica of Abraham Lincoln's log cabin at the entrance of Foster Park.
On the west side of the city, the long-sought area across the river from Swinney Park was finally procured. West Swinney Park, as it was known, became the city's recreation center. With the closing of Robinson Park, which was privately owned by the streetcar company, the city was left without an amusement park. So in 1919, the Park Board leased a section of West Swinney Park to George Trier, who was the former manager of Robinson Park. He constructed Trier's Amusement Park, which included a roller coaster, merry-go-round, funhouse, a dance pavilion, pony rides, and other attractions. For his franchise, he paid the city $3,000 per year. And to this day, some people still refer to Swinney Park as Trier Park.
The amusements in West Swinney Park were soon joined by another public swimming pool in 1922 and a baseball diamond. But the crowning achievement was the development of the Japanese gardens. Beginning in 1928, the polluted drainage ditch running through the park was dammed and lagoons of clear water were formed. Shrubbery, evergreens, exotic flowers, rock formations, even waterfalls were shaped around meandering paths. Eventually, a tea house pavilion was built in 1930.
Another interesting garden project was to be found in the new Memorial Park on the east side of the city. Formerly the private golf grounds, Memorial Park was purchased in 1918 and named in honor of the soldiers and sailors and nurses who served in World War I. Later, a monument was erected to Fort Wayne's great aviator, Art Smith, who made his first flight from the Memorial Park site. But the most unusual feature of the park was the reproduction of the Blue Grotto of Capri. The grotto contained a waterfall, extensive plantings, and rocks and boulders arranged like a miniature cave and canyon.
The most ambitious garden project of them all, though, was the sunken gardens at Lakeside Park. The gardens took almost 6 years to construct and were highlighted by an unparalleled display of roses. The rose garden contained nearly 14,000 roses of different varieties, which were bedded around the reflecting pools and the arbor. The gardens at Lakeside were named a National Rose Garden and for decades were the largest rose gardens in Indiana. Lakeside also received national recognition as the first municipally owned fish hatchery in 1928.
In addition to the specialized projects, the 1920s were notable for the tremendous physical growth of the park system itself. In the early part of the decade, 80 acres were donated to the Park Department on the northwest side of the city. The area eventually became Franke Park. Although the parkland remained undeveloped for some time, Franke Park did have a large pavilion and a day camp for underprivileged children. Like Foster, Franke would almost triple in size over the years, eventually becoming the amusement center of post-World War II Fort Wayne. It's still the most active park, with a children's zoo, bowling or outdoor theater, soapbox derby track, day camp, and acres for hiking and picnicking.
One can see the magnitude of growth by comparing 1916 with 1931. Over this 15-year period, the number of parks rose from 19, totaling 325 acres, to 31 parks with 722 acres. As for recreational facilities, there were 56 tennis courts, 9 playgrounds, 10 baseball diamonds, 3 public swimming pools, an 18-hole golf course, and 2 day camps. The park department even owned the new Paul Bear Field and constructed an airplane hangar. Parks in Fort Wayne had truly come of age.
We would like to end our story of the early years of Fort Wayne Parks by returning once again to the vision of the Progressive Era. Although the 1917 law allowed for a bond issue to realize the dream, the law was not endorsed in Fort Wayne until 1927. A full decade after passage, and nearly 20 years following the Robinson and Kessler plans. But Fort Wayne finally had its bond issue. Plans were immediately drawn for Three Rivers Park. Work began on Griswold and St. Joe River Boulevard, and riverbank property was acquired for parkland.
Yet the plan never fully developed. By the time the ideas left the drawing board, Fort Wayne was in the midst of the Great Depression. The collapse crushed property values, which had fueled the expansion of the 1920s. Most projects came to a grinding halt. Three Rivers Park, donated by the Fosters in 1912, was grabbed by Mayor William Hosey as the site of the new filtration plant. This sealed forever the hopes of a large central riverfront park at the junction of the Three Rivers. For the hapless park department, the long-sought bond issue was too little, too late.
The pressure from the Depression nearly crushed the park department. The near absence of funds from the city forced the park department to cut staff and curtail major expansion. World War II shifted priorities away from parks and recreation even further. It was not until after the war, from the late 1940s till today, that the park department recovered the drive of the early years. But that's another story.
The story of the early life of the park department is still meaningful today, for the problems faced by these park pioneers remain quite current. How much independence should a park department have within local government? Should a park district be just the city or the county as well? How much is enough parkland? What are the social responsibilities of parks and recreation in maintaining the quality of urban life? What areas best fall under park authority? Should council have the power to approve park funds, or should the park department be its own taxing district, like the Redevelopment Commission or the bus company? What is the park department's role in downtown, in the neighborhoods? What about the riverbanks?
Like the Robinson Plan for downtown, which is still being discussed today in a different form, we must remember that the past is still very much with us. We cannot escape history, but we can change the present and the future. We have much to be proud of in our park system, but we cannot forget that parks and recreation are more than just fun and games.